Are we in an economic situation where we're in trouble? Are we in trouble?
Yes, I think we are. We're living through the hinge moment, and the history is kind of shifting. We're moving to a period where things are just going to be quite different from what we had before. You need to learn how to create resilience because it's not going to be driven by government. You have to create your own resilience. In terms of jobs, things are still pretty tough. If you want to look for a job, my God, it's hard. Incomes, they're not really keeping up with the cost of living.
Is New Zealand being forced to finally build a real economy beyond housing?
Half of our wealth is tied up in property. That's very high. And that means that we're not investing in other things that would actually make us richer.
What are we relying on right now to get rich in New Zealand? Shamubeel, are we in an economic situation where we're in trouble? Are we in trouble?
Yes, I think we are. I think everything is more uncertain than it has been since many decades ago. No generation has had to deal with this for some years, some decades. And a lot of it is that grief of letting go of what we've been used to and trying to figure out how to deal with this world that's less certain. There is more volatility, more uncertainty, and everything feels like it's pressing down on you. It doesn't mean everything is going to hell in a handbasket. It's not. There's lots of good things we should celebrate, but certainly there's a whole lot of risks and a whole lot of new things that we have to get used to.
If someone wants to stick around till the end of this episode, why should they do that?
Well, they should do it because economics is probably the most interesting field there is. It brings in what's going on in terms of history, what's going on in your personal life, what's happening in business. It's all of those things together. Economics is really the study of humanity.
So let's begin with where we're at right now. How is the economy now?
Well, it's a funny thing. We were on the precipice of a recovery. We were just on the edge. New Zealand was looking like everything was going to get better. This was going to be our year, right? It's like, we've been saying this for a couple of years, and we're finally going to be right.
Yeah.
And then
prosperous 2026. I kept saying to people, may you have a prosperous 2026.
Yeah.
So is that still true?
It looks less likely. And the main reason for that is the war on Iran. That has created this huge kind of uncertainty and ripple effect. We've already experienced it with the big increase in oil prices, uncertainty around whether we will have enough. We know that there'll be big issues for the world in the next few months because there won't be enough fertilizer, there won't be enough food. It just feels like a really weird time when things were just starting to look good, but now we've got this really big left field risks that are on top of us.
Where should we be right now if we didn't have the war? Where should we be at the moment?
If it wasn't for the war, I would say New Zealand would be on a recovery path. It would have been still gradual. It doesn't mean a recovery doesn't mean everybody's doing really well all at the same time. But there would be more opportunities. There'll be more things coming through. Businesses selling more, people making decisions faster, people doing the things they haven't done for the last few years. And that's kind of what a recovery is. All those people who'd been sitting on their hands start to do things again. And just as we're starting to get ready to do that, all of a sudden, one, there is the physical cost of goods like fuel and the related things, but also just the fear. Psychology matters a lot in terms of how we make decisions, whether it's in our household, in our businesses, whether you go out for that meal, have that extra coffee, go out for lunch, or for a business, do you hire somebody? Do you make the new investment that you wanted to make? All these things would get put on ice when we're fearful.
And it's interesting how I was researching for this conversation, and I'd love to get deeper into the levers. So GDP, inflation, interest rates, if that's okay, housing market, jobs and people, and the global conflict. The global conflict is what you first talked about. And it seems to be the most impactful factor right now for us, and something that we can't control, and we need to do something to feel like we're in control. And when you're not in control, you're in fear, and fear makes you less, more cautious and less spending and bad economy. So how long do you think this is going to last?
Nobody knows, and I think that's the reality of risks. They are unpredictable, they're uncertain, and as you know, what happens with these global events, particularly with war, is wars are unpredictable. They could go in any direction. There is, I think, two things going on. The immediacy of this particular crisis, but the wider context that I think the world is going to be in a time of more conflict in general, more uncertainty in general. And so I think we have to be able to think about it in those two settings. The immediate war, it will probably end at some point if the Americans and the Iranians can agree to some kind of deal. And when that happens, that will be a good thing, because we don't want to have all those people in Iran and the Middle East suffering unnecessarily, and the consequence for the rest of the world. But if you think about what's happening more generally, what we have seen is this gradual erosion of trust in these big institutions and ideas. You know, the institutions like the UN, the World Trade Organization, NATO, those kinds of organizations are under increasing kind of erosion. Like, people just don't believe that they're the right things anymore. And yet those were the things that were built after the Second World War to provide stability and rules of the game so the world could kind of navigate its way without too much conflict. Now, as we are getting rid of those organizations, I think what we're seeing is that it's reflecting that fracturing in societies around the world, where people are upset with globalization or whatever, you know, all those things. It feels like that's not been good for me. Why should I put up with this? I want something that's different. It's much more nativist. It's much more about me first. And in this kind of world, I think what we're going to find is there'll be more uncertainty. There'll be more conflict, either economic or wars. So it feels like there's a whole kind of spectrum of scenarios that are in front of us. And we should not assume that the last 40, 50 years should be the template for the coming 40 or 50 years.
Have we experienced something similar to what we're going through right now in the past?
Of course we have. Humanity goes through this repeatedly. You know, we are quite stupid as a race in that we don't learn from these experiences. So, you know, the saying, the history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. It's a bit like that. So if you think about what's happened post the wars, the Second World War in particular, what happened after the Iranian war in 1975, both of those were quite big points in time when we'd say, look, we don't want that to happen again. So let's do things differently. Let's write ourselves some rules. Let's agree to doing things differently. And that'll give us the relative stability to do that. But I think we can't assume that it's just going to go back to that quickly. You need to go through a process of conflict and realization and then building up those things. And once you lose trust and once you lose that cohesion to kind of work together, it takes time to build it up. So I know it sounds a little bit esoteric, but in reality, that's the kind of phase that we're living in. I kind of describe it as we're living through the hinge moment, and the history is kind of shifting. We're moving to a period where things are just going to be quite different from what we had before. And whether you're an individual or a business, you need to learn how to create resilience, because it's not going to be driven by governments around the world or your own government. You have to create your own resilience. And that means surrounding yourself with good people, having real clarity around your purpose, and making sure you've got a really good culture around you. That's the protection against those things. It's not perfect, but those are the things that you can do in the face of these other things that are impactful but out of control.
I agree with you. I feel like the trust in the bigger organizations and potentially governments is... Are you actually for us? I mean, this is not a political podcast. It's a business and entrepreneurship. And
but it matters.
But it matters because, like, as a business owner, founder, entrepreneur, what's the disposition to, I mean, as an entrepreneur, I don't think many entrepreneurs rely on business governments to make their business work.
We all do. So we rely on norms. So rules and regulations are kind of what I call the floor. And then we have the social norms that kind of dictate how we do things. And the legal minimums tend to be a lot more brutal than what we would normally accept as behavior that's becoming of a good society. So when the rules and regulations change, or the trust in society changes, the environment that business works in, the environment that citizens operate in, changes. So no, we all rely on that kind of the wider setting. So I don't know if you kind of read this work by the Nobel Prize winners a couple of years ago. Probably not. It's very nerdy. I love that stuff.
Please share it. I love to hear.
So three gentlemen won it. Darren Acemoglu, Robinson, and Johnson. And their kind of life's work was saying, we can kind of see what describes the economy, but what causes prosperity? And that's a much harder question. And the answer for them was there are two fundamental drivers. One is around culture, and the other is around the institutions, which is the codification of the culture in the way we do things. And they said that's what you can have two countries that have all the same resources, the same people, access to the same education, doesn't mean they're both going to be successful. The kind of culture you have and the kind of ways of doing things, the norms that you have of doing things, the rules and regulations you have, that's what makes the difference. And I think that applies both for countries as well as for businesses. And I think that's the thing that we need to take away from all of this is when the world feels uncertain, you've got to focus on the things that are fundamental to success. And those things are probably not what you think. They're probably the things that we call soft.
And so if you may repeat it again for me, the soft things that we need to rely on to...
So it's really about culture and institutions. And institutions in economics will really mean it's the way of doing things, either the unwritten rules of society or business and the written rules. So institutions are kind of the ways we do things. And what underpins that is the culture. So in a business setting, it would be having a really clear purpose, knowing what you're trying to do, a way of operating within your organization, both with your team members, but also with your suppliers and your customers. So that culture and the ways that you operate, your standard operating procedures, your rules and regulations, your contracts, all of those things should embody how you value yourself and what is it that you're trying to achieve. The reality is if you're only in it to make money, then you're probably not a very good business person.
So we can get into what can people do now to stay resilient, to fight off this kind of, cloud, if you may, this dark cloud. And I'd like to allow the listeners to have a clearer idea of where we're at in terms of GDP.
Sure. So essentially, the last couple of years have been really tough. We've been in kind of a downward decline for a couple of years. And the way I think about it is the purpose of the economy is to make more people better off. And we haven't done that. We've had more people losing jobs. On average, our incomes are falling, and that burden has fallen disproportionately on a few people. And so the last couple of years have been pretty tough. The forecast before the war was it was going to get better from here, and we were kind of started climbing back up. But it takes a long time. So, we were hoping that our incomes, average incomes, would go back to where we were before the recession.
Do you know where we were?
Well, we were in that kind of $40,000-$50,000 a year in terms of average income, national income. And so we would expect that to kind of pick up again over the course of the next 4 or 5 years. So that's how long it takes. It takes 2 to 3 years to fall, and it takes another 2 to 3 years to come back. Right. And it feels like every time we have a new shock, that recovery gets longer. So we don't get back to where we were for quite some time. So it's almost like you're on a parallel track, but you're starting from a lower base. So it takes longer. But from an economic perspective, I think GDP is kind of a weird measure because it doesn't mean anything to people. The kinds of things that people relate to is, are there more jobs? Are wages increasing? Am I getting a better life? Can I afford more things? Can I go on a holiday? Can I have a meal out? Those are the kinds of things that people focus on. And I think right now what we're looking at is, in terms of jobs, things are still pretty tough. It's really hard to get a job. The number of job ads out there is slowly lifting, but it's still really competitive. If you want to look for a job, my God, it's hard. If you think about incomes, they're not really keeping up with the cost of living. So the cost of necessity is rising much faster than wages are. So people won't feel like they're making progress yet. And that's usually what happens at this kind of stage of the cycle where those who are doing well are doing well all the time. It doesn't matter about the economic cycle. But those who are in middle income and low incomes, they feel the economic cycle much more severely.
Do you think that's always the case with the economy?
Yes.
The ones who are well off. So when you say well off, what does it look like? If you're well off and you're not impacted by the economy?
Well, let's put it this way. If you just think about, for example, the tax take in New Zealand, the top 20% of earners in New Zealand pay 66% of the tax. That's because they earn just so much more. So, people who are in good positions, either through wealth or through income, are really quite rich. And in New Zealand, if you have money, it's a really good quality of life. But like anywhere, if you don't have good income and good wealth, then things are tough. So last couple of years, for example, the cost of food has gone up, the cost of electricity has gone up, cost of insurance has gone up, all the things you can't avoid. And that just means you've got less and less of that disposable income. So nobody feels good buying groceries, right? I mean, we enjoy eating, but it's a necessity.
Yeah.
You want to also have a little bit of leftover to do those extra things that gives you joy in life. And those things are becoming harder for a lot of people. And in downturns in particular, it does tend to affect generally the kind of the bottom half of New Zealanders much more severely.
So this is GDP. So you're saying that we are actually recovering? Or
we were
stabilizing at a low level?
We were stabilizing. We've been kind of bumping along the bottom late last year. So the data is quite slow to come through, but essentially what we're seeing was things were bumping along the bottom. We were starting to get hopeful that this year things would get better. And then the war happened, and now we don't know. So if the war ends swiftly, then we should hopefully start to recover again.
Cool.
But it won't be immediate. It takes time because the shock of that higher cost, there's a hole in people's wallets, right? And people have delayed things. You've made decisions not to do something. So everything just takes a bit longer to kind of rewind and go back to where we were. So that's the best I think we can hope for. But at the same time, we just need to be mindful that we can't rely on those external things, and we need to think about what is it that we can do in our own personal lives, either as individuals or as business people, to give ourselves a little bit of buffer.
Because with GDP, according to what I was looking into, it grew about 0.2% in the last quarter.
Yeah, it was up. Before that it was down. Before that it was up. So essentially, we have had...
What is it right now, and what should it be?
Well, typically in a good year, we'll grow at about 2.75%.
Okay.
So we're well behind that. But also it's more about saying, is the economy growing because we're throwing more bodies at it, or are we growing because we're getting richer on average? So I don't tend to look at GDP as a whole because it's a stupid measure. It's much more interesting to look at what's going on with GDP per capita, what's going with jobs, what's going on with wages, what's going with the cost of living, because it's the mosaic, it's the tapestry of life, right? So those single metrics quite often try to summarize everything and does a really bad job of it.
Right, yeah, I agree, which is why it's nice to get into the next part, which is inflation. Even if inflation is under control, does it feel like it's under control?
Mostly. Look, the way it works is...
what's it like right now?
During COVID, we had really high cost of living. So in the initial kind of period of COVID, it was because everything was gummed up, right? You couldn't do anything. And then there was so much money flowing around. Interest rates were practically free. Governments were spending money. Everybody was trying to spend more and more and more. And that kind of raised prices again. And then we had interest rates that rose, that crashed economies around the world. Governments stopped spending and inflation came down. But most people will kind of say, actually, it doesn't feel like inflation has come down. And the reason for that is while overall inflation has come down, the things that we buy all the time, the necessities, haven't. So, the things I talked about before, food, insurance, rates, electricity, all the things that you buy regularly, those costs have gone up a lot, and it really feels unbearable to a lot of people. And because those are high frequency purchases, that tends to be more immediate in our mind. So, falling prices of TVs, well, that's nice. You don't buy a TV every week, right? So you don't notice those things, and it has less of an impact, even though inflation in general is not that high. But of course, with the increase in oil prices, there's a bit of fear now that inflation, the cost of living, is going to be higher, at least for the first half of this year.
Okay, cool. So that's inflation. What about interest rates when we talk about, we've had a lot of cuts happen, and it's, I don't know, it's sitting, my notes, it's sitting somewhere around 2% or something.
2.5%, I think.
2.5%. What's that doing to the housing market? And
when the Reserve Bank sets the interest rates, they don't affect us immediately. So they don't set the cost of borrowing for you and I. So they kind of lower the cost of borrowing for banks, and then that usually then passes through the mortgage rates that we get. So they're not exactly a one-for-one relationship.
Yeah.
And essentially what has happened is mortgage rates, particularly fixed mortgage rates, have come down, but in the last couple of months have started to drift up again. And I think that's what people are feeling, is that benefit of those rate cuts has pretty much ended, and they're now kind of on the way up. And so the housing market's kind of pretty much on a holding pattern. Not much is happening at the moment.
Interesting. I've got more questions on that later, but is New Zealand being forced to finally build a real economy beyond housing?
We've always had a real economy beyond housing. I think that's always been a bit of a myth. We are quite obsessed with property, and a lot of our wealth is tied up in property. So roughly speaking, about half of our wealth is tied up in property. That's very high. And that means that we're not investing in other things that would actually make us richer. Like my personal belief has always been that you cannot expect to create good jobs and prosperous society if you don't create good businesses that create those opportunities, right? Buying and selling houses from each other is a necessity. We got to have shelter, but it doesn't create jobs. It doesn't create that long-term prosperity. So New Zealand is still not doing that very well. We are still more likely to borrow money to buy and sell a house from each other rather than to build a new house or build a new business. And that has remained a problem for us. But whether we have an economy outside of it, we've always had an economy that's much bigger. So our economy is like...
That's good to hear, actually, because I thought that we really always relied on property and... One more thing.
To give you some context,
population
our economy,
growth, that's it.
We do, and absolutely. So, but it's too easy to, I think, boil things down to this kind of one-dimensional view of the world. It's never like that. Nothing in life is that one-dimensional. Of course, there's more complexity than that, and we should be willing to hold that complexity. I think this search for this dumbed-down, one single-line slogan that explains everything, I think it does a disservice to the public. People aren't stupid. People get this stuff. And yes, we have an obsession with housing market. We also have lots of really good businesses. We also have lots of terrible businesses. All of those things can be true. And so our economy is like close to $450 billion. Not all of that is going up and down because we're buying and selling houses from each other. It's simply not that. But I think the wider issue for housing for me is when we are disproportionately invested in housing, when we disproportionately direct our new borrowing into housing at the expense of entrepreneurship and business, that has a cost. And that cost is the foregone opportunity of better jobs, better businesses, better incomes, better profits.
Can you go into that? Can you explain that to me a little bit more?
So if you think about it this way, as we get richer, we have the ability to do more with our money. We have more wealth. We have more ability to borrow money, which is really borrowing from our future wealth, right? And so then we have a decision. Where do we put that money into? Do I put that money into buying and selling a house from Mina? Or do I put that money into buying a business or creating a business or investing in new technology or training up somebody to do something differently? It's that choice. That's what really matters. And right now, New Zealand is much more likely, for every dollar of borrowing, we're much more likely to put it into housing than everything else.
Why do you think that is?
Because it's easy. It's worked. I mean, if you think about the experience pretty much from the 2000s in New Zealand, if you bought houses, you did really well. You did exceptionally well. And business is hard, right? Running a business, starting a business, growing a business is rewarding, but also difficult and challenging. So for a long time, we had this kind of, national story that if you just buy houses, you'll be okay. And it had been true. And the fact that we have very favorable tax treatment for it, very easy to borrow money for it, all of those things help that as well.
All right, you guys, I want to tell you about one resource that I look into and check all the time. It's helped me in my own business journey, and it's made me a better business owner, a better podcaster, helped me stay on top of all the business news that are happening in New Zealand. It's called NZBusiness Magazine. It's one of the New Zealand's oldest and most trusted sources for business stories, insights and analysis for SME owners and leaders. So we've partnered together to help bring these kind of conversations like this one to more Kiwi entrepreneurs across New Zealand. So if you want to stay on top of what's happening in business, visit nzbusiness.co.nz today. I also want to update you guys about my AI course that I said yes to thanks to Perrin, who said I should learn about AI. This is the AcademyEx course. This week, we covered what's coming for New Zealand business, and we're looking at $76 billion being added to the New Zealand GDP by 2038. 76 billion. Also, humanoid robots are now selling for under $5,000, and 68% of small to medium-sized businesses, they're not even planning for that yet. The window to get ahead is closing fast. So more of that next week, but this is my update. If you want to learn more about this course, there's a link in the description or around the screen somewhere. There's a new intake in July, and I think you would love it. Hello, thanks for watching this video. Quick note, have you subscribed? Over 90% of people who are watching on YouTube or listening on Spotify or on Apple are not subscribed or following. Please do so now. It's so simple. The button will be around the screen somewhere. You either hit subscribe or hit the follow button or leave me a review. It will help me so much, helps me grow as a channel and support my work. So I really appreciate it. Okay, back to the episode. Do you think the story of the housing story of use the house to grow your wealth is potentially over?
It does feel like it. It's certainly last few years have been very, very hard to make money out of housing. It's been going sideways. Rental market's been very tough. Rents are falling in many parts of New Zealand.
Yeah.
So being a landlord now is actually quite hard work. And so if you don't have the capital gains and you're not making money in terms of growth in rents, why are you doing it? Whereas the risks for business haven't gone away, but the rewards, the potential rewards are still there. Because it's within your control, right? With a business, if you put in your work and you get lucky, both of those things matter.
Of course.
If you can do those two things, then at least you've got some agency. Whereas with the housing market, by and large, you're relying on the market going up to lift you up. Everybody thinks that they made money in the property market because they were so smart, but actually they made money because the market went up because we didn't build enough houses for about 40 years.
Do you think we're building more houses now? Obviously, you're part of the Simplicity team, so what do you see that happening with you guys?
Well, it's not just us. So a couple of things have happened. So Auckland, I guess, is the poster child for it, with the unitary plan that came in about 10 years ago, really kind of enabled a lot more houses to be built. And we have been building more houses. We could argue whether they're going in the right places or not, but we're building more houses. And that has had a real effect. So we can see it in the data, that housing supply has exceeded population growth, that some of the pressures are easing.
So we have we have more houses than people? Is that what you're saying?
We are building more houses than we need for now, but there is still the kind of shortfall that we accumulated over many decades.
Right.
So we're heading in the right direction, but we need to keep building at a high rate to kind of get on top of it. So my kind of view of the housing market is we're getting a lot better in terms of building more houses. Certainly at Simplicity, we're trying to do our bit. We're building build to rent, so we're building new homes that we're renting out to people for as long as they want. And we've seen extraordinary demand for it. And from a whole cross-section of society, from everybody from young people to older people wanting to have a place where they can be close to their community but not have the cost of owning a home or having a rental that's not very good. But we are seeing this housing supply really improve, and that's been one of kind of a big part of my kind of work as an economist is we have to be able to give people access to shelter. It's a basic human right, and we've been failing to do that. It's unaffordable and is of poor quality in New Zealand. So to be able to improve that is really helpful. I think we're making really good progress. The job is not done, but across the political spectrum, we've gone from arguing about whether there is a housing crisis to now arguing about who's got the better idea in terms of solutions. I'd much rather have that fight.
Good. It's a different argument, isn't it?
Well, it's a good argument.
It's a next level step.
Well, absolutely.
There's awareness, and now there's let's do something about it. What do we need to do something about it?
We've gone away from debating and denial.
Yeah.
We've gone from denial to debating the solutions. And that contest is actually really good. We want to have political contest when it comes to good ideas and policies, because nobody has a monopoly on the best ideas to fix these wicked problems. So to have that contest of ideas is helpful because we want that tension, and it's also how democracy works.
So are we making more houses, in really simple terms, are we making more houses on a faster rate that we used to do, maybe 5 years ago?
Absolutely. I mean, the rate of house building in New Zealand now is way higher than it has been in our history. So for a very long time, on average, we're building about 1,000 houses a year. We should be building more like 40,000 houses a year.
Is this where we're at right now?
That's kind of where we are now.
30,000 houses a year. Yeah. And is this where it should be? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
But we need to be at this level for many decades to essentially mop up the shortfall that we've created in the last 40 to 50 years.
Yeah. So is this having an impact on prices of housing and demand?
It's certainly having an impact on rentals. It's hard to see in terms of house prices because there are other motivations for why people buy houses, but rents are probably the best kind of metric of the supply-demand balance. And essentially what we've seen is rents are still relatively high compared to incomes, but they're not as expensive as they were 10 years ago. So we're kind of making a dent. For the longest time, rents were just going up relative to incomes. They're just getting more and more expensive, telling us that things are getting shorter and shorter. And now we have turned the corner. It's getting better, but it's not affordable still. So in the last year, for example, the government spent nearly $5 billion in housing subsidies.
Why?
Because people can't afford it. Where everything from middle income people who get the accommodation supplement to the people on the homeless on streets, all those things require some sort of subsidy. So roughly speaking, about 80% of non-homeowners get some form of government support for housing.
And is this still happening now?
Yes.
Is this the case now?
Yes.
Okay. So it sounds like it's not so low that it's really cheap and like just everyone goes and rents. It's cheaper than owning a home.
It's the direction of change.
Direction. Okay. So yeah, in terms of jobs and people, do we have unemployment and labor shortage at the same time, or what's going on in that space, and how is that impacting our economy?
Yeah, look, labor shortage is a funny one. When I started working as an economist in 2001, that was kind of the first things I worked on was labor shortages.
Yeah.
And even then, labor shortages were a really big issue. And every year since then, those shortages have only become more intense. And it's not going to get better. It's for a couple of reasons. We have an aging population, so we're actually running out of young people and working age people. And the second thing is our education system's actually not done a very good job of creating those people that are coming through with the right skills, ready to be useful in the workplace. And our businesses, by and large, are not good at training people up. We're not good at formal and informal training, so we expect ready-made people. We want somebody else to do the training. But then you don't get the right person if you do that, right? So that labor shortage story is absolutely intense. All around New Zealand, I hear the same story, that it's really, really hard to find the right people with the right skills. But
can I say or ask what are we short of at the moment?
Everything. Pretty much everything. So if you go on a dairy farm, finding a farmhand, finding a manager, somebody who's got the right skills to be able to do all the different tasks, really, really hard. I was down in Balclutha recently doing some interviews, and the bar for one company that I spoke to was, if you don't do drugs and you turn up to work, we'll do the rest. And they still had trouble finding people.
Wow.
So there are a lot of different reasons why we see shortages, and it's right across the skill base. In terms of the current situation right now, the unemployment rate is relatively high. But what's interesting is that while people have lost jobs, we've seen more of the adjustment taking place with hours rather than job losses. So businesses have reduced overtime. They've moved people from full-time to part-time because they know that when the recovery comes, they're going to need these workers. And it's really hard to recruit. And it doesn't mean that just because there is unemployment and all that kind of stuff that nobody's hiring anybody either, because I think there's a common misconception that the hiring only happens when the economy is good.
Yeah.
It's not true.
Not true.
So take a guess. How many people do you think started a new job in the last 12 months?
In New Zealand? 12,000?
1 million.
Oh, in New Zealand?
Yes.
Start a new job?
Yes.
Wow, that's so cool. That's good to hear.
It is good and it's bad in the sense that we have a lot of churn. So a lot of the reason why we hire people is because people leave. So we lose a lot of people because our retention is low. And so every year, we, roughly speaking, regardless of if the economy is going up or down, we're hiring about 1 million people a year.
Well, we have 5 million.
We have 5 million population, about 3 million people in work. So we're turning over the entire workforce.
Yeah.
a third of the workforce every year, which is an extraordinarily high number.
Compared to other countries, I mean, compared to a relative country.
Yeah,
like
we are
Singapore?
pretty high.
Yeah.
We are pretty high. And the challenge for that is, I think, again, when we talk about unemployment, we focus on those people who have lost jobs. And of course, that's important. For them, it's really difficult. But at the same time, what we do know is that the labor market is much more dynamic, much more movable than people see. So it's like, that duck on water. It looks like things are kind of going up and down in a fairly gentle pace, but there's furious activity that's going on beneath the surface. And that's what the labor market's like. And so that shortages that we talked about, that mismatch, the lack of good quality management and leadership and culture inside of organizations means that we lose a lot of people all the time. And we're always having to hire a lot of people. So there is this incredible amount of, I think, waste that happens in our economy because many of our businesses are just not that good. We're not doing a good job of hanging on to people. We're not doing a good job of creating workplaces that people want to stay in. We're not creating career progression. We're not giving them fulfillment. And then we're surprised that they leave and they go, oh, they must be a bad employee.
So are you saying career fulfillment in general, like quality of working is pretty low in New Zealand?
Absolutely. So most of the reason why people leave a job is because they have a bad boss, bad culture, and a lack of career progression. Those are the three main reasons people who leave jobs tell us other main things.
Yeah, it's true.
So this is not surprising. But then we have to turn the mirror around and ask ourselves, what can I do to fix those things so that my employees don't leave? And some of the businesses that I work with, they have extraordinarily low turnover rates, like less than 10% of their workforce turns over in a year. And in those businesses, what I find is you've got leaders that are just so focused on creating that environment. And that comes from that shared purpose, having a really good culture, very good managers. They invest heavily in having good managers and good leadership training, as well as the things you do for staff. So a lot of that investment is actually in yourself. And quite often, again, as business people, we quite often think, it's not me, it's everybody else that needs to change. But it's a two-way street. And as soon as we get to do that, it improves. I know I've kind of strayed a bit from your original question, but I feel like the macro story of unemployment and skill shortages quite often hide the realities of what we can do in our businesses. And I don't think we should get too caught up in those wider ebbs and flows because they're outside of your control.
What I really am getting is there's always a reason behind shortages and unemployment, and it's not just the business is struggling to keep the people because they're not making enough money because of the economy. It also is them not being they're not doing enough to retain those employees.
Absolutely. And sometimes economic cycles do matter, right? So if there's less customers around, then it is going to be harder. There's less work for some people. But I also know businesses that do really well during downturns because they've taken market share. And, costs are low. You've got your pick of employees. There's lots of reasons why you might be able to succeed during an economic downturn. So we should not assume that what's happening in the wider economic cycle must happen in your business. They're not the same things. That's the context, right? That's the water that you're swimming in, but you can swim against the tide. You can do better. You can do things differently. And quite often I find some of the most successful businesses navigate downturns really well because they focus on maybe the downsize, but once they downsize, they're more profitable.
Yeah. And the people this is a common advice that I hear is, what do you do in the downturn as an employee? And the answer is get good at what you do. Get better at what you do.
Well, it's
upskill, right?
Absolutely. Whether you're a business or an individual, I think investing in yourself is the answer.
Yeah.
And my advice to all my clients over the last couple of years is go cut your competition's lunch. There is no growth happening in the economy. Any growth you have in this market is because you've taken somebody else's market share. And one of the most frustrating things I see during downturns is people stop advertising, people stop marketing, and you're like, what are you doing? This is your only competitive advantage in this market. If you're not doing that, you're shooting yourselves in the foot. And in fact, we know all the evidence is really clear. If your share of voice is high during a downturn, not only will you do better through the downturn, you will get an outsized share of the recovery when it comes. So those who haven't invested in marketing and advertising for the last couple of years are going to find that they're playing out of luck if and when the recovery comes.
Why do you think they don't invest? Why is it when the downturn comes, people stop, cutting short on things that will help their business get visible or get known or be in front of more people and all the rest of it?
Well, I think it's human nature, isn't it?
Fear? Is it fear?
It is fear.
Is it fear so powerful then?
Fear is a very powerful emotion.
And most of it is perception of like,
well,
there's nothing like substantial, isn't it?
Well, but there is the costs are real, the benefits and unrealized and in the future and uncertain.
Yeah.
So, you're taking a leap of faith. So, if there's a downturn and you're having cash flow issues to go, I'm still going to keep investing in marketing and I don't know if I'll get the payoff. So the costs are really present. You can see them, right? You can feel it. It goes out of your bank account. But those benefits that you might see in the future, it's uncertain. It's in the future. So there is this kind of difference in time, and one feels tangible and the other feels intangible. And so when you have fear, it's very hard to make that investment. When times are good, you've got spare cash. Hopefully you're making money. So it's okay to take that risk. It's okay to spend that money. So I don't blame people, but I think, it's a fairly kind of common issue. We shouldn't be surprised that our brain tells us this, and we're rational enough. We should be able to look beyond the fear.
But the point is just to someone wanting to, I suppose we'll get to what do you need to do in this economic downturn or economic situation, if I must say, and what do you need to do. But I want to get into the global conflict part, which we've already talked about. But is global conflicts or are global conflicts becoming the single biggest risks to New Zealand's recovery right now?
Well, absolutely. It's the war on Iran has absolutely thrown a spanner in the works. The big increase in oil prices has really exposed the fact that so much of the world absolutely runs on fossil fuel. Not just the fuel itself, but all the plastics for packaging, all the chemicals, all those bits and pieces. It's just absolutely in every part of the economy. It's hugely intertwined. And so not only have prices increased, there's this fear that we might not have fuel or some of the supplies for some time at some point in the future. We've never dealt with that, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, like, my question earlier, have we gone through this before? Has the economy experienced that
kind of rationing?
It
happens during wars.
Stresses before where we've had a COVID lockdown or, like a pandemic and then...
Sure.
All the rest of it, we've gone through this, but this war seems to be next level, different. It's hurting us more than it hurt us in the past. I mean, Iran has been in war with other countries. Did it hurt New Zealand back then?
Yes. So the last time we had the big Iranian conflict was, of course, the Iranian Revolution in 1975. That was one of the big oil shocks that really jolted New Zealand back then. So we had oil shortages back then. We had carless days. We had reduced speed limits, all that kind of stuff. So we've been through this before, but rationing is very unusual. So rationing tends to happen during periods of war, periods like the pandemic when we just couldn't move. There was this virus that was likely to kill people. So there was this, there's very exceptional circumstances when things don't flow. So it is a very unusual situation, but I think it's not to become paralyzed by it, but to understand that these risks are present, that they're probably going to repeat. And we have to ask ourselves, what do we do differently? And some of it is like really basic. Everything relies on just in time. Maybe you should have a little bit of buffer. And what does the buffer look like in your business? Well, it'll depend on what your business is. But for each of us, I think that's the question, is how do we build ourselves resilience, but giving ourselves a little bit more buffer, a little bit more flexibility, a little bit more runway.
Has this need for oil and fuel increased the case for us going electric even more?
Absolutely. I mean, electrification, in my view, is national security. There is just no two ways about it. So if you think about our total energy needs, we're still very reliant on fossil fuels. So electricity in New Zealand is relatively independent. But when it comes to transport, we're extremely reliant on fossil fuels. So, we know there are alternatives now, right? So we know that we can have access to far more generation. New Zealand has the capacity. We can do a lot more in solar. We can do a lot more in geothermal. We can do a lot more in hydro. We can do a lot more wind. We can do storage. Like, the technology is incredible.
But we're not doing it?
No, because, we are backwards when it comes to making these investments. I think we lack courage as a nation to make those big investments, in part because we become scarred by our drunk Uncle Muldoon. The Think Big projects almost bankrupted New Zealand. And we've kind of set up, the defense mechanism was, we'll never do that again.
So he, just for those people who don't know the background, he invested a lot of money. This is like a previous prime minister who invested a lot of money.
Pretty much off the back of the last big oil shock was a huge amount of investment in our hydro dams, the refining plant up in Marsden Point, the exploration for oil, the exploration for geothermal. A lot of those things were good things, but also a lot of it was done with borrowed money from overseas in US dollars. And when New Zealand had to pay it back and our currency was devalued, we almost went bankrupt. So that was why we had those huge reforms in the 80s, those painful periods in the 80s and early 90s. I was watching some footage recently of people who went through, the farmers in the South Island who had been through that. And there was this farmer who was in tears because he was going to lose everything. And it was a devastating time for New Zealand. So it was a harrowing experience where we went from being relatively wealthy, things were going really well, and all of a sudden we had to make these big changes. So yes, we've been through that period and we've been not so good at making those big investments again. But we do need to make those big investments because electrification will give us sovereignty when it comes to both energy and for national security. It's going to happen. It absolutely will happen because the technology exists, prices are coming down. And with this big shock in oil prices, the lack of trust in global governments doing the right thing, because nobody can sit here and watch TV today and go, or social media and go, I can trust our global leaders to do a good job. We just can't, right? And so you go, okay, what's the alternative? We are already seeing people going, actually, maybe I should put that solar on my roof. Maybe I should get that electric car. Maybe I should do something differently. And there's a lot of goodwill as well, right? It's not just for the money reasons. I know people are using more public transport. Yes, because prices have gone up, but also because people realize it's an alternative and it's the right thing to do, right? If you can do it, why wouldn't you? So there's this kind of extraordinary kind of change that happens during these periods of shocks. And I'm hopeful that this shock is going to shunt us into making bigger investments in renewables and electrification, because I think it would give us the basis for a more prosperous economy as well, because we are very constrained by our energy supply. As you know, cost of electricity is really high in New Zealand.
Yeah, exactly. When I had Simon Bridges on the show early in the year, and he was cautiously optimistic. That was way before the war came through. And he was the energy minister, and I asked him, why didn't we get energy low? Like, why wasn't it very effective and affordable when you were, part of the government and
because
apparatus?
We don't like to be, we don't like to lead. We don't like to make those big centrally made decisions. And there is this ideological fear that if government comes in and says, we got to do this, it's a bad thing. We must rely on markets for everything. And so, markets work well for a lot of things, but they also don't work very well for other things. And they don't control for these uncertainties, these risks, these changes, these hinge moments in history. You got to have some ways of, as a collective, as a country, saying, no, we want to make an investment and we're going to find a different way of doing things.
Kind of a bit more like lack of innovation, lack of being bold to take action. He did say, maybe you're right, maybe we were a bit soft. We didn't see
not
in
maybe,
the future.
Definitely. I mean,
I'm trying to be nice here.
But it's not just Simon. It's successive ministers over a long period of time.
Yeah.
So I think it would be unfair to put the blame at the feet of any one minister.
Person. Yeah. Of course, it's a collective, but I think we're almost like that. Like, how did you not see, like in the early 2000s, how did you not see that energy is going to go up or the different needs are going to come through? As a government, isn't that what you really do?
The future is unknown land, right? I mean, it is so different.
You've got all these analysts and economists and people like yourself who are very smart.
We just make things up. So I wouldn't trust economists too much. I think you got to be very cautious.
That's a bit of a concern then.
But I think when it comes to energy security and increasing electrification, that's not been a contested idea. It has been very much a broad consensus that we do need to do it. The contest has been around what's the best way to do it, who leads, and can we leave it to markets? And until recently, there was this faith that markets would take care of it and everything would be fine. And I think we find ourselves today with the war in Iran and recognizing that, no, it's not going to solve by itself. So we should do something. Whether we have the courage, the political courage to do so, and whether the public are willing to support it remains to be seen.
What are we relying on right now to get rich in New Zealand?
Hope.
I was not expecting you to say hope.
We are not. We do not have a strong strategy in terms of how to get rich in New Zealand. It's very disappointing. We have had endless working groups and strategies and reports, but there is no unified thinking in New Zealand. One, we don't even talk about wanting to become rich. We don't talk about it. We don't want to talk about being more prosperous, whatever that might look like. It doesn't have to be just about money, but there is no unified vision, I don't think, of what a prosperous New Zealand looks like. And certainly there is no strategy in terms of the kinds of levers we might want to pull to try and do that. Again, there is an underlying belief that we should leave things to the market and everything will solve itself. Maybe it will. I mean, the experience of the last 40 years suggests that it hasn't worked. So if you look at New Zealand's GDP per capita, it used to be pretty much the same as Australia until 1975. Since then, Australia's gotten a lot richer, a lot faster, and we've fallen behind.
How do you think Australia is getting richer?
Well, a couple of things. I think they have been lucky. Luck plays a role in that. They've gotten lucky because the resources have been great and they've been really plugged into the rise of Asia. That's certainly been one of it.
Can you explain what the resources are?
So they've got so much. They can pretty much dig anything up. Copper, iron, petrochemicals. They're very rich in mineral resources, but it's not been only mineral resources, right? They've also had strong growth pretty much across every part of the economy, stronger than us. And that's why so many New Zealanders choose to live in Australia. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of New Zealanders live in Australia. And the reason is you can get a good job. It's not just highly educated people, right? All stripes of New Zealanders go over to Australia, make a good life. So, they've not only kind of done the thing of benefiting from the rise of the commodities, they've also invested in themselves. If you think about the superannuation scheme, for example, they force it to invest in their own country. As a result, they've invested in infrastructure, which is better, bigger than ours. We didn't even have compulsory super in New Zealand, and we still don't, right? We kind of had KiwiSaver. There was a half-assed approach that started in 2008. We think it should be bigger, but we don't direct that money into New Zealand. Now, we have an infrastructure deficit that's hundreds of billions of dollars. Why are we not using our own savings to fix that gap? And it doesn't make sense. It's kind of like ships in the night. We put our money elsewhere. We bring in money from somebody else to be able to fix these things. I feel like we're kind of stuck in this weird kind of misdirection.
So are we directing our investment money into somewhere else?
By and large, yeah. Only about 30% of New Zealand's KiwiSaver money is invested in New Zealand. Most of it goes overseas.
Why is that? Why can't we just invest money in New Zealand?
Don't know. We do at Simplicity because we think it's important to put our money where our mouth is. We are here to make New Zealand better. Our job is not just to kind of be hands off and let things happen. We feel a sense of duty and responsibility to also invest in the things where we think there are opportunities that'll be good for both our members and for New Zealand. We won't always get it right, but I think as long as that's the intent and you can find those opportunities, then I think it's something that we should do. I think for a lot of managers, they're just not that interested.
So Australia is obviously way ahead. We're talking about how many New Zealanders are going overseas, and I've had this conversation so much. I mean, with Professor Pwrfully, he came, talked about it. Simon Bridges as well. But is that true? Is it living in Australia better than living in New Zealand?
Yes.
I've been watching some videos. They may not be conclusive, but some videos about what is cheaper in New Zealand and what's cheaper, New Zealand or Australia? And I don't know, it didn't come across that Australia was cheaper by any means.
You earn more. So the average family, the Kiwi family, the average Kiwi family in Australia earns about 30 to 40% more than in New Zealand.
Right. So it's the earning power.
They earn heaps more. The cost of living is much the same. So
it's much the same. That's what I thought.
So if you're going to pay $600 a week on mortgage here, you probably pay the same in Aussie. But if you're earning 30 or 40% more, you've got more money, right?
Yeah, more left over to do things.
All those fun things in life. And I think, of course, it's not going to be true for everybody.
Yeah.
And I don't think we should become, again, paralyzed by it. But the thing is, we've had relatively speaking, a steady outflow of people going to Australia for many decades. This is not new. I've done so many interviews in the last few months on Kiwis moving over to Australia, mainly because our ex-PM is going to move there as well.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah.
Isn't that interesting?
Well, why not? I've lived in Aussie. It's a great place to live. And, very similar to New Zealand. People don't like hearing that, but, we have very similar cultures. And that's why it's so easy to go over there. We have no restrictions to go over there. You can just go and work and you can go and live. The cultures are similar enough. The language is familiar. There's lots of Kiwis over there. There's a whole bunch of reasons where we have such a close cultural kinship that movement is really easy. The question isn't why are people leaving? The question is what can we do to entice people back? Why are we not investing in ourselves to give people the reasons to stay here? And we always look to the government. What will the government do? Well, I don't trust the government to do the right thing. So if the government's not going to do it, the question is what are you and I going to do about it? And I think the people who have the ability to do this better than anybody else are businesses. We are the ones who create jobs. We are the ones who create reasons for people to be able to stay here and give the opportunities that people want. And so I still think that, there is still so much faith in businesses, right? So if you look at the Edelman Trust survey that came out last year, it was really interesting. It said, we have very little trust in media, we have very little trust in government, but who do we trust the most? Our own employers.
Wow.
It's kind of the last bastion of trust that remains in community.
Isn't that interesting?
But we have to earn that trust and we have to reward that trust. So there's a huge amount of responsibility on us as business owners and entrepreneurs and managers and leaders is how do we repay that trust? And the way we do it is by investing in them and in our businesses and share the benefits with the people who make it happen. And the good businesses do that. Bad businesses don't. Bad businesses see their workers to be exploited so that they can make more money themselves without sharing in the benefits.
Are we bad at getting a lot done with the time and people that we have? Look,
New Zealand has so much potential. I know I'm quite a negative kind of person, but the reason for that is you got to be able to see the risks so that you can focus on the opportunities. And what I see when I go around New Zealand talking to businesses and individuals is there is a huge amount of energy, huge amount of talent, and there's many, many good people doing amazing things. But we got to really celebrate those and multiply and amplify those things because we want more of these heroes doing cool things. To give you one example, I met this guy in Tokoroa. There are 2 firms in Tokoroa that make log processing heads. Each of these things costs like $2 million. And they're built in Tokoroa, right? Of all places, because of the forestry, because of the history of forestry. But they're exporting to the world. They're the world-class leaders coming out of Tokoroa. So you've got these 2 businesses that are extraordinary that comes from New Zealand, and they're world leaders. And so when I see those kinds of places, I go, clearly it's possible to manufacture in New Zealand. Clearly it's possible to have the right people to do the design. Clearly we have the right people to make the thing. We have the right people to sell the thing. What's limiting us? I don't think it's that we don't have the raw ingredients. I just don't think we have those people that are bottled up and scaled up.
Okay. So my few other questions that I have for you are all about where to from now. How can we kick our country back into gear, into this positive space that we need to get into?
Sure.
And what does it look like? We did touch on a few things here and there, but I'd like to summarize it if that's okay.
So the reason why I choose to live in this country is because I think we can do better and New Zealand has a huge amount of potential. And I don't think we can wait for some future government or some leader who's going to do it. We have to ask ourselves, what can I do to make things different? And so each of these little opportunities that we create, each of these businesses that we create or communities that we create is where the change starts to happen. We can't go top down. I think we have to go bottom up. I'm impatient. I don't want to wait. And what that looks like is we want to have people who see their leadership potential and invest in their own leadership. Because your focus in your audience is mainly around business and business leadership, I think that's one of the biggest things we can do is invest in ourselves to make sure that we're good leaders, because good leaders are able to see that opportunity. And what I mean by that is that opportunity is framed around our higher purpose, whatever that is. You doesn't matter. But as long as you're really clear about your purpose of what you're trying to do, I hope it's not just to make money, it's also to make New Zealand better, because that's what drives me. And then it's about being able to create a business that's able to do that. So investing in your managers, investing in your staff, creating a good culture, those are the things that pay dividends. And that culture spans everything from your suppliers to your staff to your customers. That's the foundation for good business. And to my mind, that's really what creates that potential for success. It's the same thing that I see in community. Like I see communities around New Zealand that are really kind of doing things for themselves. They're taking agency. And quite often it's built on this foundation of trust and cohesion, that you might be different. We all have differences of opinions, different ways of saying things, but being able to have conversations, being able to make decisions together in spite of differences, that's a superpower. And when you're able to unlock that in a community or in a business, that's when you get really good outcomes. But it's not enough to have that. You still need to have good leaders that provide that endurance. Somebody has to stick it out. Somebody has to stay true to that purpose. So leadership and culture together, that to me is the magic of anything. So even if you take nothing else away from today, those are the two things that I think are ingredients for success, whether it's in business or in community.
What are we going to look like in 5 to 10 years? I know you don't like to look out into the future and predict, but what do you hope for New Zealand? What does a healthy New Zealand economy actually look like in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, I don't really kind of think about it in terms of an economy. I think of it in terms of society. If I look forward 10 years and I see a more prosperous New Zealand, I see a New Zealand that has less poverty, because we have about a quarter of New Zealanders that go hungry sometimes, which I think is shameful for a country that wants to feed the world. Feed your own people first. So certainly I think having sufficient empathy to not have hungry people in New Zealand would be a good start. The second thing that I'd love to see is us grappling with our big issues around our aging population, around climate change, and around electrification. Those three things, I think if we do well, we'll make huge progress. So poverty and those three big pillars would be my picks for things to fix.
Fabulous. Shamubeel, you've been incredible. Great to have you. Good to have this discussion. My first economist on the show.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on.
Good to have you.